Hong Kong will not host APEC finance ministers' meeting. A preview of tomorrow's budget blueprints and big cuts for the U.S. Army.
Good evening. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Finance Ministers meeting will no longer be held in Hong Kong in September as originally planned. Instead, Beijing will host the meeting at a later date. Some believe the decision may have something to do with the proposed Occupy Central movement. Stephanie Choi reports.
Hong Kong had been gearing up for the APEC finance ministers meeting from September 10th to 12th. But the government announced this afternoon that Beijing had written to inform them that due to the number of events and the broad range of themes and issues to be covered, some of the meetings have to be rescheduled. So the APEC finance ministers meeting will be held in Beijing instead after late September. Skeptics wonder if it signals the shape of things to come on constitutional development.
I think it's quite obvious that the Chinese government want to avoid any Occupy Central movement during the APEC meeting planned in September, and that makes us suspicious that whether there will be some very drastic decision by the central government during the summertime denying Hong Kong real universal suffrage.
It is also the time that the second step, the political reform on 2017 being announced in Hong Kong. And I'm worried about whether in the second step, the Beijing government will put forth some unreasonable regulations.
When they persuaded LegCo to support it, they said Hong Kong will reap a lot of benefits. Now I guess the officials will come out to say, oh, even if we don't do it, Hong Kong will not lose out at all. I think the whole thing is so ridiculous.
A local member of the National People's Congress, Chang Yu-tong, agrees that Occupy Central would have been taken into consideration because it might pose a security threat to the meeting.
And I think they probably taken into account a wide variety of factors and consider that for timing and other reasons, Beijing is more suitable than Hong Kong.
The finance ministers' meeting was expected to cost $80 million, $63 million of which required LegCo approval. Lawmakers have already agreed to the funding request. The government says it respects and understands Beijing's decision to change the timing and the venue. Stephanie Choi, TVB News.
Sources say the financial secretary will announce an increase in the tax allowance for those who care for their elderly dependents in tomorrow's budget speech. And higher water bills may be on the way. Jenny Lam reports.
The government's budget surplus adds up to about $12 billion, according to sources. The administration was expecting to be $4.9 billion in the red. Still, the forecast surplus will be at its lowest in 5 years. Financial Secretary John Tsang had already warned that there will not be as many sweeteners this year than in the past. But sources say there will be a slight increase in the dependent parent and dependent grandparent allowance. For people who care for parents or grandparents aged between 55 and 59 years old, the allowance will go up from $19,000 per dependent to about $20,000. The allowance for caring for those aged 60 years or above will increase from $38,000 to about $40,000. And to address grievances among the middle class, there will be a tax rebate, but the amount will be more or less the same as in the past year. Last year, the cap was set at $10,000. On revenue, sources point out that various fees, such as water and sewage charges, have been frozen for years, and the government is unable to recuperate its costs. So those fees and charges will have to go up, depending on the operational cost of the relevant departments. There is also a lot of speculation among car dealers whether first registration tax for new vehicles will go up, and that has boosted sales in recent weeks. This dealer, though, admits they use this tactic to attract customers pretty much every year just before the budget. The Consumer Council says whether that amounts to misleading customers depends on the actual words used, and it warns consumers not to make snap decisions based on marketing promotions. Jenny Lam, TVB News.
And TVB Pearl will bring you the Financial Secretary's budget speech live at 11 a.m. tomorrow.
Turning overseas, the U.S. Pentagon says it will shrink its army to its smallest size since 1940. It will close military bases and make other cuts as part of a broad reshaping after more than a decade of war. Alan Booknia reports.
The announcement comes just a week before President Barack Obama is scheduled to submit his 2015 budget plan to Congress. U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel said the armed forces have to adjust to the reality of smaller budgets.
As we end our combat mission in Afghanistan, this will be the first budget to fully reflect the transition DoD is making for after 13 years of war.
Under the plan submitted by Hagel, the active duty Army would shrink from its current 522,000 soldiers to between 440 and 450,000. It will also eliminate its A-10 fleet of aircraft. Hagel acknowledged the plan comes with risks.
But it cannot be any other way if you're going to fulfill the President's defense strategy guidance and protect our interests around the world.
The cuts come as the Pentagon is attempting to absorb the bipartisan budget deal reached in December that cut its planned spending by $31 billion for 2014 and another $45 billion in 2015. But the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said the U.S. can't afford a smaller military so long as it retains a technological edge and the agility to respond to crises around the globe. At the core of the plan is the notion that after the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan proved longer and more costly than foreseen, the U.S. military will no longer be sized to conduct large and protracted ground wars. It will put more emphasis on versatile, agile forces that can project power over greater distances, including in Asia. Alan Booknia, TVB News.
South Korea is up in arms after catching North Korea trespassing in its waters in what's suspected to be an attempt by Pyongyang to spy on their military drills with the U.S. This comes as the president of South Korea announced plans to boost reunification of the rivals.
In a landmark move, South Korean President Park Geun-hye announced plans to form a preparatory committee for unification with North Korea, with the goal of turning the two Koreas into one nation. In recent months, Park has talked repeatedly about unification. So this bold step underscores her commitment to what she believes will be a win-win for South Korea and neighboring countries. But just when relations between the two Koreas were showing signs of improvement, a North Korean patrol ship was spotted trespassing. The vessel crossed the tensely guarded northern limit line 3 times last night. A spokesman for the South Korean Defense Ministry said the boat refused to retreat until 10 warnings were broadcast by the South Korean military. The North has long criticized the South's annual military drills with the U.S. as a rehearsal for war. Because the drills got underway just yesterday, the South suspects last night's border violation is Pyongyang's attempt at spying on their military might. Either way, the South said it is prepared for any provocations. This news comes on an emotional day for hundreds of South Koreans who said their goodbyes to their long-lost relatives from the North. This marks the latest round of family reunions on the Korean peninsula. Theirs is a tragic separation that hinges on the fact that the Korean War ended in a ceasefire rather than a peace treaty, leaving the two Koreas technically in a state of war. Cheerful farewells as the reality set in. This is most likely the last time they'll see one another. Of the more than 129,000 requests for reunions, many of them never happen because those involved died waiting for approval.
The interim government of Ukraine has set presidential elections for May 25th. The announcement comes as the deeply divided country tries to avoid economic ruin while its fugitive president remains on the run. James Aiken has the latest.
Ukraine's political crisis takes on new dimensions almost daily. In the aftermath of the ouster of its Russian-backed president, Viktor Yanukovych, the challenges ahead are daunting. With its economy in tatters and previously promised Russian financing in doubt, Ukraine needs a lot of money fast. The finance ministry says it needs $35 billion to stay solvent over the next 2 years. But Western leaders say any aid must be tied to reforms.
The United States, working with partners around the world, stands ready to provide support for Ukraine as it takes the reforms it needs to get back to economic stability.
But before those reforms can begin, Ukraine needs an elected government. That process began today when the interim government declared snap elections for May 25th. Today, acting President Alexander Turchinov called on voters to elect a president worthy of the courageous Ukrainian people. Today, Ukraine's parliament said that a new national unity government should be in place by Thursday. It was delayed to allow further consultations. Amid Ukraine's upheaval, a manhunt continues for the person who led this country until just a few days ago. Law enforcement agencies have issued an arrest warrant for the now vanished Yanukovych over the killing of 82 people, mainly protesters. But what if he manages to leave Ukraine?
I can imagine that the European country will not recognize this arrest warrant.
In another sign of the gaping political divisions in Ukraine, pro-Russian protesters in the eastern regions are gathering to show their support for Yanukovych. They say the new leaders in Kiev do not speak for them. For now, they say their loyalties remain with Russia, which has always provided stability for their region. James Aiken, TVB News.
Student protesters clashed with riot police in Caracas last night as President Nicolas Maduro chaired a meeting billed as a national dialogue for troubled Venezuela. The students threw rocks at police, who in turn responded with tear gas. It's the latest in a string of anti-government protests that have been staged across the country the past 2 weeks. At least 15 people have died in the violence. Enrique Capriles, the opposition candidate in the last 2 presidential elections, refused to attend the meeting. Another opposition leader, Leopoldo Lopez, remains jailed, along with dozens of others who have taken part in anti-government protests.
And still ahead in our newscast, war of words heats up over influx of mainland tourists. A look at a new children's hospital in Kai Tak. And Rafael Benitez Napoli battles Genoa.